Go ahead, Carrie.
Right. Welcome, everyone. We are so excited for you to join us for this United States Brain Injury Alliance conference. Please take a moment to get yourself settled. We will be recording, so please, if you don't want to be on camera, please turn your video off. We are excited for you to join us. You are in a webinar called Grief and Loss Recovery, and you are going to be with today the wonderful Gina Pollard. And Gina, I was just thinking of this last night. Gina's been one of those silver linings for the alliances where we've gotten to work with you when everything went virtual. And I was actually thinking of this last night. We've never met in person, which
we have not. No,
we've worked so much together over the last year. I kind of have not. It's
yeah. I wouldn't recognize you necessarily if, in real life, because I find that happens sometimes about not recognizing people IRL. So yeah.
Well, wonderful. Gina is a certified grief recovery specialist and a certified trauma support specialist. And oh my goodness, has the world needed you more than ever in the last year, Gina. We're going to go ahead and get started, but Colleen and I will be moderating this for you. Please go ahead. If you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. And periodically throughout or at the end, Gina is going to take any questions. Gina will ping you when there's a good question. Please go ahead and put those in the chat box. And please enjoy today. We are going to be together for an hour. And Gina's going to just walk us through processing and talking about some of the things that have happened over the last year.
Yeah.
Take it away.
Here we go. So hi, I am Gina Pollard. I am a certified grief recovery specialist, certified by the Grief Recovery Institute, which is an international organization that trains people on how to help with grief. I am also a certified trauma support specialist, certified by Trauma Institute International. I have a private practice here in Phoenix. Actually, I guess it's kind of around the country because I have clients around the country, where I help people navigate life transitions, deal with grief and trauma, and help them move forward to a life that is freer and more open because we've cleared the depths of the things that have been holding them back. I have a master's degree from Fuller Theological Seminary. And so a lot of my counseling work was also done in the graduate school setting as well. So I got into grief, just briefly, I got into grief work because I was already working with women whose lives had been impacted by incarceration. They had either been incarcerated or they had kids or family members who'd been incarcerated. And at one point, a woman said to me that her boyfriend didn't understand why she was crying all the time after her son went to prison. And it dawned on me, it was one of those moments of absolute clarity when I looked at her and said, it's because you're grieving. You're grieving. And she looked at me and she said, oh, that makes sense. Because in a way, my son is not what I thought my son was going to turn out to be. So she was grieving the loss of what she thought life would turn out to be. So today we're going to spend some time, and then I was working with abuse and trauma survivors, mostly sexual assault survivors, and we spent a lot of time grieving the loss of safety and of trust and things like that. So what we find is that grief is all over the place. We just don't recognize that it's grief. In this country, we are taught how to gather things and how to gain things, but we're never or very seldom taught how to lose things. So let's get started. I want to start talking about some of the things that that we may not think of as grief, but I first want to start with some definitions about what grief is. And yeah, here we go. So let's start with the definitions. Grief is the normal and natural reaction to a significant emotional loss of any kind. And people will tell me often that they didn't realize all of the losses that they had in their life. well, at the beginning of the program that I use, we do what's called a loss history graph, and we talk about all the things that you've lost. And what I think it's important for you to understand is that there are over 45 different kinds of losses that you can experience in your life that may lead to grief. I've recently had a number of friends who have lost pets, and pet loss is a big one. Pets are unconditional. We call them our fur babies, and they are close to us in ways that humans are not often close to us. And so people are often surprised at the depth of grief for losing a pet. Grief is also the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. So this shows up a lot in my clients and in the people who are experiencing grief, because those things that our bodies used to be able to do, we're no longer able to do. So the aging body or a chronic disease can often, chronic disease or injury can often cause us to be in grief. I often see people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond who are mourning the loss of their 20-year-old bodies, when everything we did with ease. And we could eat the 3 a.m. cheeseburger with bacon on it and be okay. And now looking at a celery stick or celery stalk will cause us to gain 5 pounds. So there's that kind of change as well. This also comes in when there is an estrangement in a relationship. So families fall apart. We have known this over the last few years because of political reasons, or because of the pandemic, or because of debates over coronavirus. And then there are all the other reasons why families experience trauma and grief and estrangement. And the third definition, particularly for us today, is the feeling of reaching out for someone who's always been there, only to find when you need them again, they are no longer there. Think about divorce, think about breakups, think about moving, for example. Think about any number of things where you used to be able to call up a friend. Maybe you've just sort of faded away, the friendships faded away. So you're grieving the loss of the closeness that you used to have as well.
Gina, this is Carrie. Sometimes we see that grief can come for an end where it's a celebration and it's good, like a caregiver maybe who isn't needed as much because someone finishes 2 years of physical therapy and can drive again. So sometimes there can be grief, even though it's a forward motion.
Absolutely. Good things can cause grief. You know, I often talk about getting a promotion where even as you are excited about perhaps more money, perhaps a new title, more authority, it's good. And then the other part of it is that it's not so good because the buddies that you used to hang out with and complain about your boss, you're no longer able to do that because maybe you are the boss. Or you now have to have different priorities. So that, and a financial change up or down, we're going to look at some other examples, but that's a great idea or a great example, Carrie, about even as much as recovery continues, there may be milestones that bring grief as well. Great point. Great point. So here are some examples, and we talk about tangible losses and non-tangible losses. And I'm going to run through a couple of these. That's obviously, and divorce, we've talked about that. We talked about moving. A financial change up or down can do it, can cause you to move into grief, obviously down, but also up, because the more money you have, the more complicated things become when you have to manage that money. Retirement is also a tie to identity. So loss of identity can happen and cause a great deal of grief because you're not sure who you are. Legal problems, empty nest, end of addiction. One of the things that we find is that when people get sober, and I'm speaking as a person who's been in recovery for 21 years, even as we get sober or clean, the thing that we used to turn to unwind or to give us some measure of being calm is no longer there. And so we have to figure out new ways of being able to de-stress. Starting school can do it. Another one I like to point out is engagement or getting married, because all of a sudden the routine that you had in your home is now different than it was before, and your relationships with your friends may change. Wow. So those are tangible ones. And then I'll talk about the intangible ones. And then I'm going to ask you all to give me in the chat some examples of losses that you feel might have led to grief. So loss of trust. If you have had a friend or a family member that has broken trust with you, you understand that you can no longer feel the same way about them in that relationship. Trust, when it's lost, is very difficult to restore. A loss of safety, and that can be physical safety or emotional safety. I want to be very clear about that. If a crime happens close by to you, then perhaps you don't feel safe in your house. If you have had bad falls or you have been injured, then your ability to take care of yourself can contribute to a loss of safety as well. Loss of control, particularly if you are relying on other people to take care of you and you can't take care of yourself, or a loss of control because you're seeing a loved one who's hurting and you can't help them. Loss of faith, oftentimes injuries, accidents, losses of all kinds can cause us to question why things have happened in our life. And depending on your faith tradition, this may cause you to feel some grief as well. Loss of companionship, and certainly loss of freedom. Yeah. So I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and ask you in the chat to talk about what other kinds of loss. Yeah, loss of hope. Yeah, when you thought perhaps that things were going to get better and you find out that they're going to stay. Is that what you were saying, Nat? Is that what you're referring to? Who else might have some that you can put in the chat? Losses that might cause you to have grief. Yeah, loss of identity after a brain injury. Thanks, Barb. Loss of youth. Absolutely. Yeah. Loss of routine and familiarity after a brain injury. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Because there's all sorts of clinical things that happen or physical things that allow you not to be able to recognize or to do the things that you used to do. Yes, absolutely, Sean. Loss of limbs. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a huge physical loss, and it changes who you are in relationship to your body. Oftentimes we see people who say, I need to get back into my body so I have a sense of who I am. Yeah, yeah. That loss of youth that Sandy brought up, it's really interesting that I see it quite often. I see it in men and in women. I'm just going to put it that way. That we're not able to do the things that we used to do. I had one male client who for the longest time kept saying, Gina, I just want my mojo back. I want the swagger I used to have. And I'm in my 50s now, and I don't have the swagger I had when I was 18. So, yeah. Yeah, loss of personality. Yes, yes. And there's two of you that said that. About the loss of personality because they look the same, maybe, or maybe they don't, and you miss their laugh or their smile the way that it was. Empty nesters, absolutely. I see that a lot, and I do a lot of life transition coaching for folks, and we start off with grief, and then we begin to plan the way that things might go forward. Loss of the ability to read for long periods of time, absolutely, absolutely. Nat was saying lots of hope in clients during the Mechanisms of failures when attempting solutions on a repeated basis. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and Amber, yes. What's the next thing? What is the next thing? There's almost an adrenaline kind of let down. And if you've ever done theater or music or anything like that, once the show is over, what's the next thing? And I absolutely understand that. Oh, and Kimberly, yeah, a loss of belief in humanity. Yeah, that disappointment can be really, really hard when the people that you thought were going to be there for you are not, whether they're not able to or they choose not to as well. So as you all can see, grief can come up and sadness can come up in a whole lot of different ways. There can be a lot of reasons. And here's what we know about grief. Grief is, it gets stacked on, it's cumulative. It gets stacked one on top of the other. So if you experience a loss and then you don't get a chance to process through that loss, what you end up is a lot of things stacked one on top of the other. And then what happens, it's something seemingly inconsequential that happens and everything tips over. It is the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. And then everything starts exploding or imploding, and it's hard to dig out from that. And so it's really important to be able to look at things one piece at a time. I often talk to my clients about a giant ball of tangled yarn and the fact that those are the emotions that happen when we're dealing with grief. That there's anger and there's frustration and there's confusion and there's all of those. And so it's important to be able to begin to tease apart where those emotions are coming from. I want to caution you in this, that a lot of people, when we're talking about grief, that a lot of times when we're talking about grief, people want to talk about the 5 stages of grief from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. So it's really important to note that those 5 stages were what she came up with after working with people who were dying. They themselves were dying. They weren't grieving. And there's a different process when you're processing your own imminent grief compared to your own imminent loss, as opposed to the loss of someone else or something else. So in addition to the 5 that Kubler-Ross came up with, we also know that there are many more, and that we need to not think of it as a trajectory, because what happens is people get really, really frustrated because they're feeling like, okay, I got anger and then I got denial and now I'm coming up here and I'm finally at acceptance. And oh, wait, I just hit anger again, or I just hit bargaining or whatever it is again. Grief is not like that. Can I just tell you that grief is messy? All right. It is not easy peasy, and you're going to go through some steps and then you're going to be okay. It doesn't happen that way. And so give yourself some grace, or allow the people who you might be working with who are dealing with grief to have some grace, and understand that even as you're going along and you're making progress, there are going to be triggers that happen that remind you of the loss. And that's okay. Understand that you may have deep grief because you loved deeply, or you were deeply ingrained in the life that you had. And now that that life has changed or gone, you have to resettle your feet. You have to do a framework that allows you to process through the things that you're feeling, those things, and to discuss those things that you wish had been better, different, or more. Better, different, or more in the relationship, in the situation. It can be particularly acute when the person that you are grieving over has died, or is no longer able to communicate clearly with you. So you're not going to get maybe that apology that you wish you'd had, or have that deep, long conversation that you wished you'd had. And so understand that it takes work. Yes, complicated relationships lead to complicated grief. Yeah, that's great. Carrie said, somebody just rang my doorbell. Sorry about that. Maisie, stop. Somebody that messaged her and mentioned that grief survivors of violence, the grief that people feel when they're a survivor of violence often feels like being victimized. Yes. When accessing services, because you have to tell the story all over again. Just have to tell the story all over again. And so that just continues all of it. Yeah. So I apologize for the barking dog. All righty. Any other comments or questions before I move to the next thing?
Gina, I just want to add to that. Sometimes we'll work with people that are going through, maybe there's a trial for someone that attacked them, and just to sustain having to tell that story sometime for 2 years or whatever, however slow the process is, I just thought of that as you were talking. It's a lot.
Yeah. It's really, really hard. And it's also hard when people don't believe. I'm thinking of survivors of sexual assault, or even survivors in a car accident, where people are trying to put the blame back on the person who was injured. And so to not be believed absolutely re-victimizes. So we have to be very careful. Thanks, Carrie. Great point. All right. So these are some of the responses to grief. And we refer to those at the Grief Recovery Institute as, we call those STIRBs. So those are short-term energy relieving behaviors. These are the things that we do when we are overcome with emotion or anxiety or any manner of things, and we are wanting to not feel the pain so acutely. When we're feeling anxious or nervous and we just want to calm down. So drinking is one of these. And what I want to say here, sorry, before I go too far into this, is that some of these can start out okay. So 1 glass of wine may be fine if you're not an alcoholic or not somebody who has a drinking problem. But if you're drinking a bottle of wine or a half a bottle of wine a night and you're relying on it to get through, then it becomes a problem. So any of these can be good, except when they are taken to extremes. I used to think that a whole sleeve of Oreo cookies was a single serving, but I realized what I was doing really was medicating feelings and looking for comfort in the middle of the Oreo cookies. So exercise, gambling, video games, isolation is a really big one, because we don't want to talk to anybody, or we feel like we're being a burden. And so it's just easier not to have to deal with it. Sleeping is often a sign of depression. So we want to look at that as well, either sleeping too much or too little. Sex can be a response to grief, and can be fine in the right context, and it can be coping, unhealthy coping in the wrong context. Smoking, that would be cigarettes or marijuana or whatever it is that you're smoking. Workaholism is a really big one for a lot of people. I'm just going to keep myself busy, which is what the next one is as well, because then I don't have to think about it. And if I don't have to think about it, then I'm okay for right now, until maybe it's time to go to bed. And you are laying there remembering the great loss that you have, or remembering that your life has changed and longing for the old way of life. Eating, drugs, shopping. We even call shopping retail therapy, which is all fine and good unless you are spending money that you need to be spending to for rent or groceries or whatever, and you have become close to being a hoarder, where you have bags and bags of things that are not anything that you're going to use, and you're using them to fill the hole that's in your heart. And the internet, with the advent of social media, it is so easy to scroll your life away. And to get lost living vicariously through other people, or to get lost being jealous of the lives that other people have too. I would like to remind you that the social media presence that you see from other people really is their highlight reel. It is not necessarily what their real life is about. And it's a very interesting thing for me as a counselor to see people, some of the folks I know, I see their social media reel, and I'm recognizing that what's going on is there are two totally different realities here. There's the reality that's on social media and the reality that I hear in my office when they come and visit me. So, Robert. Yeah, Robert, those are really good comments. Yeah. Stage theories do not in any way fit brain injury. You're absolutely right. I think it's really difficult to talk about stage theories in general. And it's also really helpful to remember that they're theories, that not every single situation is going to fit those as well. Questions so far? Let me know. All right, we're going to go back. So here are the tasks that we have with regard to grief recovery. These are adapted from Warden and his 4 tasks of mourning. He actually has 11, but he talks about these 4 primarily. One of those is to accept the reality of the loss and to understand that once the loss has occurred, it's really, really difficult to go back. And depending on what kind of loss it is, you have to adapt to what is actually going on right now. You can't go back. Native Americans have a saying that says you don't stand in the same stream twice. I love that one because you don't. Even if you step out and you step exactly into your footsteps, the water has already washed away what was going on at that moment in time. And so you have to adapt to where you are now. The second task is to experience the pain of the loss. We want to not experience pain. It's human nature. It's the nature pretty much of all living things not to want to experience pain. We avoid pain at all costs. And there are times when we have to sit and understand that, yes, this hurts. Yes, people around the world experience pain, and we need to be kind to ourselves in the midst of that. Kristen Neff does some amazing, amazing work around mindful self-compassion. Her book, Self-Compassion, is, as far as I'm concerned, the seminal work in learning how to find compassion for ourselves in the ways in which we find compassion for other people. Because we will beat ourselves up and we will judge ourselves for what we should have done or could have done or would have done. And that only continues the grief and shame spiral. The next thing is to adjust to this new life. What does it mean now that this has happened and I'm feeling the pain? How do I manage to fashion a new life? That means that that person's not going to be there. It doesn't necessarily mean that I can't talk to them or write letters to them or things like that, but they're no longer there. And that's whether you're dealing with a brain injury where there's been a personality change, or somebody is in a totally different state. You have to adjust to the way that life is, even as you grieve the way that life was. And then the fourth one is the reinvest in the new reality. So that's the beginning to figure out how you live a life moving forward. So first we're adjusting to the fact that life has changed, and then we are looking at rebuilding or building a life going forward. Oh yeah, the name of the book is, let me just do it really quick. It's just called Self-Compassion. She has a workbook that goes along with it by Kristen. She has a workbook that goes along with it, and her website is great, and there are guided meditations and things like that to help, because mindfulness is really critical for our ability to do this. So tell me what your questions are. Give me some idea of things that may be new to you as we talk about what grief is, or areas of grief that have been particularly difficult for you. I'm really interested in hearing your comments. One of the things that has happened in this last year is the loss of the ability to touch each other, and skin hunger is a real thing. The first time I heard the phrase, I thought, oh my gosh, that explains it. For those of us for whom physical touch is, for me, it's my top love language. Hugs and touch, those are really huge. And so, and I live by myself. So not being able to be around people and to be able to touch and hug was really, really difficult. The other thing is that we've had the losses of not being able to celebrate milestones with each other, right? So graduations and weddings and family reunions. And then really importantly has also been the inability to be with loved ones as they have died and as they have gotten really ill. And if you're a caregiver, there has been a difficulty getting services perhaps brought into the home, or finding respite care. I know a number of people who are having a difficult time finding respite care for homebound family members. So this has caused us to deal with the loss of what we consider normalcy. And if we go back to this particular slide, these are the things that we've had to adapt to. And the folks who have been able to accept the reality of this new paradigm, the reality of the fact that the old way of doing things, where we shook hands and we hugged and we kissed without even thinking about it, has been really hard for people. Because even as we move forward and perhaps move out of the acute stage of this pandemic, things are not the same. Things will not be the same. We will change the way that we interact with people. We don't know about how long masks will last. We don't know about physical touch and things like that. So we've had to accept that. We've also had to experience the pain of that loss and say, this is really hard for me, especially if you're an extrovert or you're very close to family and you've not been able to see your loved ones. What we've also noticed is that there has been a regression for a lot of people who relied on services because they haven't been able to see occupational therapists or physical therapists or any of the other support services that they've had before. I know that special needs students have not been able to get the one-on-one or the special services that they needed in education. I have a number of friends with children on the autism spectrum, and it has been a very, very painful year for them. So then we've had to adjust to this new life, or adjust to life, understanding that we didn't know how long this was going to go on, right? We didn't know. And so we had to make the best of what we could while we could. And now we're starting to reinvest in the new reality because we have been given some tools. So perhaps a vaccine works for you. Yeah. And so it's been challenging, to say the least. And even as we come out of the pandemic, there's a different kind of grief that goes along with it, right? Because people are saying, no, I've had my vaccines, if they've had them. I should be able to do whatever I want to do when I want to do it, forgetting that that's not always the case for everybody else, and that there are still precautions that need to be taken. Industries have changed. It's hard for restaurants to find help right now. And so you can't maybe go to the same restaurants that you used to like to go to. And even now, accessing services is difficult because some practitioners or some therapists are feeling comfortable going back and some are not. So even as much as we want to get to the good old days, those days are going to have to be ameliorated by new health practices that we do. So yeah, Colleen is absolutely right. COVID presented us with the loss of control. Yep, we just can't. It's been very, very awkward to see people. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, she's saying that helping clients that may be into a rage, or there's not a program that offers what they want, and then they alienate the resources that are available. So everybody is stretched so thin. And she gave examples: bring my new refrigerator right now, or come clean my house right now. Yeah, it's been hard. And I don't know if you've been trying to purchase major appliances or not, but the wait has been months for people for new furniture, for everything. And then people are at their wits' end and are being snappy and putting a lot of pressure. If you think of your grocery workers or your pharmacy workers, there's a lot going on. Yeah. LD, yes, the pandemic has really challenged people's faith in knowing what the right thing is, in knowing what it is. And one of the things too, as I think about the faith aspect of it, is that for a lot of people, church was the way that they were able to make contact with people, especially if they were isolated. And now church for some people has not been going on. And so they've had to really be even more isolated than they were. Yeah, yeah. And there is Carrie's saying about the fear of losing the things that they gained over the last year. And that's the question about going back, right? Isn't that the big question as we think about what we're going back to? Are we going to go back to the overly busy schedules that we used to have, where we don't get to see anybody? There's a new movement regarding monotasking as opposed to multitasking, which I'm kind of in favor of, but I'm not sure my type A+ personality is going to allow me to do that. Where we need to do one thing, do it well, and do it mindfully at the time, as opposed to trying to figure out how to do 5 things all at once. So there's a movement for those of you that are frustrated by multitasking. Yeah, these are really great comments. I really appreciate these. Yeah. So as we begin then to figure out how to move into this new reality amongst the pain that we have all experienced, whether we've experienced it directly or indirectly, the question for you is, what do you have control over? What kinds of things can you do in your life? One of the things that I talk a lot about with people who are experiencing grief is this grief fog. So Oh, I like that. There is a question about whether we truly multitask or not, whether our brains are capable of doing it. So here's the thing. There are several things that you can do even as you are experiencing grief. I'm going to see if those are on. No. So I'm going to give you some examples of some things that you can do even as you are experiencing grief. Please understand that we experience grief in at least 4 dimensions. We experience in the physical dimension. So the somatic responses, those can be GI issues, trouble sleeping. They can be aches and pains that are exacerbated. I know for a lot of people who experience chronic pain or fibromyalgia or any other kind of pain, really that the amount of stress has exacerbated the amount of pain, which is another reason why we're seeing people self-medicating. And we've seen an increase in overdoses as well over this last year. So the physical dimension. And so that requires that we remember to do things like stay hydrated, try and eat good foods, in my case, put the Oreos down, and that we are making sure that our most basic needs are met. There is the emotional dimension. And that dimension means that we may be feeling sadness or rage or discomfort or anxiety. So here's what I have my clients do when it comes to dealing with grief. My clients set a timer 3 times a week for 20 minutes. And I ask them to do a brain dump journal. And so there are 2 rules. It needs to be done longhand if possible. If not possible, then the computer is fine, but the preferred method is to do it longhand. And it's literally dumping whatever's in your brain. You are not editing it, because I can pretty much guarantee you nobody's going to make a movie and call it The Notebook about what's in your journal. For some people it might, but I doubt very seriously that that's going to happen. And it is everything that's in your head. Whether it makes sense or not, you're not editing for spelling or grammar or logic or any of that. It's merely to get it out of your head, because we spend so much time lost in our head. So I'm asking people to do that 3 times a week, more if possible, longer if possible, whatever works for you. And sometimes it may just help if it's just bullet points to get started. My clients who do this brain dump journaling actually process through their grief a little faster, because they're not getting stuck and waylaid and distracted by all the stuff that's in their head. So that journal helps, and it really sort of answers my comment about it's difficult to reach out to other people, but writing is really, really helpful. And longhand is great because it causes you to sit and be in the moment with those feelings. And then there's the mental realm of it, and that really has to do with cognitive processing. Lists are your friends. Lists are your friends. And I've had a number of clients lately who have been really overwhelmed by everything that's going on, especially as their world begins to open up again. And it's like, I don't know what to do. And lists are really important. And I've had them just make lists and then go back and prioritize. And then we pull out some of the things that are really easy to do, because nothing succeeds like success, and you need to be able to show yourself that you can do some things. And then we look at some of the larger things and break those down into smaller, achievable chunks so that everything doesn't feel like it's overwhelming. Okay. And then the spiritual realm. And so depending on your faith tradition or what you consider your own personal spirituality to be, that may be that you take a hike, or that you spend some time in meditation. It depends on what it is that makes you feel more mindful. So meditation for sure. absolutely meditation. And also spiritual reading, whatever works to make you feel closer to your faith. I will let you know that questioning your faith is quite normal. Questioning your faith is okay. And I have seen a lot of spiritual abuse around people saying that a whole ration of things to people who are doubting. But doubt is normal and doubt can be resolved. So in those 4 dimensions, there are interventions that can help with those. I really would also suggest for all of those that you find out who your real support system is. Not everybody is worthy or able to sit in the front row of your life without casting judgment. So as much as possible, weed out the folks that are going to judge you and tell you that you're doing things wrong, and cling to the people who will just listen to your heart without offering advice. Yeah. So I'm looking at the comments again. Yeah, Maya's saying, I hope I'm saying that right. Grief makes it hard to reach out for help, but talking to others really, really helps. Yeah. And if you're dealing with somebody who's grieving, can I just tell you, don't worry about saying the right thing or the wrong thing. Just show up. Okay, just show up. You don't have to do anything but sit next to them and watch TV. You don't have to do anything but sit next to them and let them talk. Sometimes it's really helpful to ask them about the loved one who's gone or the ways in which their life has changed, and then listen. There's this whole thing called the ministry of presence. Just being there with somebody is helpful. Oh, good. I said it right. Okay. LD said feeling grief about going back to work. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Finding the silver lining can be helpful. Yes. And it's hard when other people don't understand that you're not the same person. That can be another source of grief for people, is losing relationships because everybody expects you to be exactly the same person that you were, whether you are the person with the brain injury or you have a loved one who has had a brain injury and you're the caregiver. Here's the other thing, is that sometimes the healthier we get, the more we're able to see what's going on in the world, and we make some choices not to be stuck in the same old ruts. So find new community if you need. Find people who will lift you up and be there for you without exacting too much from you. Barb, the role of journaling really is to help you untwist the thoughts that are in your head and to give voice for the feelings and the thoughts that you have. So it also calms us down a little so that we can begin to see what's really going on. Oftentimes I will have clients bring their journals with them. I ask them not to go back and read them, but to bring them with to their next session, and then we go back and look for themes. Sometimes when you are journaling, especially if you're doing stream of consciousness or brain dump journaling, you'll start writing and going, oh, I didn't realize I felt that way. So it's really untangling the emotions and giving you some space to slow down and feel what you're feeling, and giving you an outlet for those things that you may not feel comfortable saying to others. We have about 10 minutes left. Any other questions or comments? The book that I use with clients is called the Grief Recovery Handbook. And it is an excellent book. It also talks about PTSD and complex trauma, complex PTSD and then trauma rather. and the role of grief in those as well. Yes. So I do want to let you know, it's been a pleasure being with you. I have a Facebook page called Grief and Loss Recovery with Gina Pollard. You can find me there. When I send this PowerPoint over to Colleen, it will have the slide that has my email address, my website, and then my cell phone number. Please feel free to reach out if you have questions, or if you'd like to schedule some time with me. I also have a large circle of referrals. And you can also go to the Grief Recovery Method website and find a grief recovery specialist in your area as well. Yeah.
Well, Gina, thank
You're
you.
Absolutely. You're going to get the contact slide when you get the PowerPoint deck.
Gina, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a United States Brain Injury Alliance webinar. I'm Carrie, I'm a board member, and Dr. Bob Carroll, I believe, was on too, who's also a USBIA board member. So thank you to Dr. Carroll for his service. Our webinar schedule is back in August. We're going to have a webinar called How to Gauge Activity for Kids After Concussion. Such a tricky area. Dr. Joya is going to talk about that with us. And then in November, supporting survivors of brain injury in a criminal justice setting, another hot topic. So continue to join us for these USBIA webinars. We thank everyone. Please keep reaching out, talking about and processing all the things that we've been through the last year together, and also as life changes for yourself as a survivor or a professional. So thank you so much. Colleen, any announcements before we head out for the day?
I want to thank everyone. Gina, especially, thank you so much for presenting today. That was wonderful to listen in on. Carrie, thank you for hosting. And just to let everybody know, it's going to take me a day or two to get this video ready, but I will send a link to everybody where you can watch this again. Gina has provided me with the slides. We'll send that along as well. So thank you, everybody, for coming today.
We appreciate you and stay safe.
Bye-bye, everyone.